Good afternoon and welcome to BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch, powered by the Private Pension Administrator of Malaysia, or PPA, which is a central administrator for private retirement schemes. It's Thursday, the 27th of April, and we have our regular Thursday guest, David Kuo, who's the founder of the Smart Investors Singapore. David, as always, great to have you on the show.
Selamat tengah hari, Brian. Let's see if it's a down day Thursday, yeah?
Well, we hope not, but let's take a look at the market numbers and then get back to you for your insights. We start with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is at 29,059. It's up 2.58%. Ethereum is at 1,908. It's up 2.34%. Now, looking across to your end of the woods, we start with the equity markets. The Straits Times Index is down 0.52%. The KLCI in Malaysia is up 0.16%. Shanghai is up 0.24%. The ASX All Ordinaries is down 0.45%. The Nikkei is up 0.01%. The Hang Seng is up 0.04%. And the Kospi is up 0.22%. Largely up, David, although ever so slightly. Tell us why.
It's fluctuating, isn't it, Brian? I mean, it's actually going from red to green throughout as you were speaking. So I think investors, traders are a little confused at the moment. They don't know quite which way to go. I mean, last night the Dow was down about 200 points. Nasdaq was up 0.5%. So that should have been quite encouraging. But at the same time, there are things happening around the world right now. And if you have a look in particular, I mean, I like to focus on the Straits Times Index. That is actually down today, mainly because there are a whole bunch of property stocks in the red today on the Straits Times Index. We've got City Developments down about 5.7%. Keppel is also down. Then we've got Mapletree. Now we've got Capital Landmark Trust, and we've also got other property companies like Ascendas and Mapletree Commercial Trust. They're all down. And I think there are some concerns at the moment about property prices here in Singapore. And
Well, this is all obviously an initial knee-jerk reaction to the property cooling measures that were announced yesterday by the
uh,
Singapore government.
yeah, you're right. They're going to be hiking the additional buyer stamp duty, particularly for foreign buyers here in Singapore. So that's doubling from about sort of 30% to 60%. And they're hoping that this will quell the thirst by foreign buyers here in Singapore. We all know that property prices are rising here in Singapore, and as a result of those higher property prices, rents are also increasing here in Singapore, and that's hurting a lot of people. I mean, there is some anecdotal, I was going to say a lot, but there is some anecdotal evidence that expats are saying that it's too expensive to be here in Singapore and they're looking elsewhere. And maybe companies are looking at that also. I mean, if you are a multinational company operating here in Singapore, what on earth do you do? I mean, if you bring in foreign talent into Singapore, are you going to be paying a higher salary for those people in order to compensate them for the higher rents that they have to pay? I mean, some expats are paying north of 8 or 9,000 Singapore dollars. I mean, in Malaysian ringgits terms, I mean, that's about 20 odd thousand Malaysian ringgits per month to actually sort of have the privilege of working here in Singapore. And so the Singapore government believes it needs to step in and try and sort of stop these property prices from rising. And whether or not they are successful remains to be seen, Brian.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question, really. Is this really, I mean, 60% of a property value as tax as a transaction tax is really quite a lot. That in a different way, and if you look at it through a different lens, is really some kind of wealth tax, to be honest.
Well, is it though? I mean, this is where it becomes really tricky, I think, for authorities and for governments, in order to try and find a way in which they can somehow cap the rise in property prices. But put yourself in the position of, say, a foreign multi-millionaire, right? And you want to come over here to Singapore, and you've got so much money Brian. You've got such an extraordinary amount of money that whether you pay, okay, let's for argument's say it's $1 million for a condo. Whether you pay 1 million or 1.6 million, of which that 6.6 of a million is a transaction charge, which is a stamp duty that you have to pay. You've got so much money anyway. Does it really matter? I mean, it's a bit like these sort of rich people going into a restaurant. Bring me your most expensive bottle of brandy. Bring me your most expensive bottle of wine. And the guy says, well, it's $10,000 a bottle. Give me 6 because I've got so much money, right? And that is the problem that you have. The question is, what is driving up property prices? If you believe that property prices are rising because of demand, then why not build more houses? Why not build more condos? I mean, if we have a look today at the top loser, it was city developments, down 5.7%. So is city development, what is going through its mind now is, do I build more properties at the moment? I mean, if they actually sort of clamp down on the demand by foreign investors, and let's say they don't come into Singapore and buy property, but instead go to Malaysia or KL or somewhere to go and buy their property, why should city developments build any more condos? Why should they build any more properties? And so therefore, you end up with a shortage of supply. Demand locally might still be quite strong. And so therefore, prices are going to rise. And if you
But
have a look at the
Singapore,
additional, yes.
sorry, David, you finish what you had to say.
And so if you have a look at additional buyer stamp duty, has it really worked? I don't know. I mean, has it worked? I mean, this isn't the first time we've had ABSD here in Singapore. And has it worked over the years? Well, probably not. So how much higher are you going to go in terms of the ABSD in order to try and deter people from coming to Singapore? But you were going to interject about something, Brian.
Well, again about a supply equation. If there is a supply equation and you have rapid building, you
Yeah,
solve the demand problem.
yeah.
And maybe
So
that's a solution that they want to look at, because land sales are very tightly controlled by the government.
yeah. Okay. So I'm not going to get too political about this, but the same situation happened in Hong Kong. The property developers in Hong Kong were literally sort of dictating government policy. And every time I go to Hong Kong, and more recently, when you fly into the Hong Kong's new airport at Chek Lap Kok, and you are traveling into Kowloon, my goodness, how much land is there? Yeah, I mean, they could build on all of that, but they don't want to build on it. Why? Because the property developers say, we don't really want that too much land being released, because effectively what then happens is whatever land we have in our land bank is going to fall in value because there is just too much supply of land. It's a very difficult and almost intractable problem. Whether you are in Hong Kong, Singapore, or in London, the same problem happens. And local councillors in the UK say, not in my backyard, go and build somewhere else, because I'm quite happy where I am at the moment. My property is going up in value. I don't want to release any more land, any more greenfield or brownfield sites for you to build on, because otherwise it could affect my personal wealth in some way, my property wealth.
Now, David, I think this is something we have to take for a longer discussion,
Sure.
because I want to zoom back on some of the issues that are resonating now within the Singapore market. UOB announced stellar results yesterday. Uh, what are your thoughts on this, and how different is this really from the US in particular?
Very, very different, Brian. I don't know why everybody lumps everything into the same basket. I mean, they have banking problems over in the US, SVB, and also in Europe. They had Credit Suisse, they got problems. And then they somehow sort of go 1+1=5. And they actually sort of say that the banks here in Asia are in trouble as well. We had results from Standard Chartered. They were fine. They were actually sort of very good. And now, of course, we have UOB coming out and saying everything's okay. We're actually sort of making more profits than we did before. The net interest margins are healthy, and therefore the net interest income, which is the amount of The difference between what we pay savers and what we actually charge borrowers, that is actually okay. And I think, we'll be hearing the same thing from OCBC and also from DBS later on, and also your Malaysian banks. I have no worries whatsoever, that Public Bank and Maybank will also produce good results. So it is very dangerous sometimes to sort of read across from one continent to another and say that, oh, Asian banks are going to be in trouble. We're not in trouble. We're going to be fine. So there's nothing to worry about. Having said that, there are concerns about interest rate margins. In other words, will central banks be permitted to carry on increasing interest rates at the rate that they have done previously, and whether or not that interest rate margin will be able to sustain the profits at banks all over the world, Brian.
And this issue is also an issue that's plaguing the Bank of England, who is pointing fingers, and the governor is pointing fingers at everyone else except the Bank of England.
Okay, let me correct you. It's not the governor that is pointing fingers. It's the chief economist, a guy called Hugh Pill, who was blaming everybody, for the problems in the UK. He blamed the pandemic. He blamed the Ukraine war for high inflation in the UK. He even blamed the weather, for goodness sake, for the other thing. He blamed avian flu, for the high prices that are experienced in the UK. I mean, doesn't he realize he's an economist, for goodness sake? I mean, doesn't he realize that the reason why there is inflation is because there is too much money chasing a limited supply of goods. And what you need to do is to reduce the amount of money that you created, right? Not just him personally, but the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve, and banks all over the world created far too much money. And now he's actually urging workers, don't ask for higher wages. He's urging companies not to increase prices, in order to maintain their lifestyle of previous. He said, we're all getting poorer at the moment. Well, I don't think he's getting poorer, but unfortunately, there are lots of people in the UK who can't afford to heat, they can't afford to eat, and the UK is going through some kind of chill spell at the moment where the weather is actually getting colder again. So despite the fact that we thought there would be some respite in the weather, there isn't. So it is a problem. And what they need to do is to withdraw the amount of money that they created, the trillions and trillions of dollars that they created, but they don't know how to do it, Brian. That's the problem. They didn't know how to do it when they first started, and they certainly don't know how to do it now without causing financial distress around the world.
Now, David, on that note, thank you very much for your insights. Thanks for coming on the show, which we've taken quite a long time to finish up today. Thanks a lot for your insights, David.
You're welcome, Brian.
Now, we've been speaking to David Kwok, founder of the Smart Investor in Singapore, on BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch, powered by the Private Pension Administrator of Malaysia, which is the central administrator for private retirement schemes. I'm Brian Fernandez. This interview will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our social media platforms. It'll also be on our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.